Dr. Kellen Hart stood at the window, gazing out at the dark expanse of space, his thoughts a mix of excitement and fear. The research facility on Xylar 5 was a marvel of human engineering, tucked away on a distant planet that most humans would never see in their lifetime. But for Kellen, this place represented more than just a job. It was a chance to make history. His team had just made the first successful contact with the Velar, an alien species unlike anything Earth had ever known. The Velar were rumored to be technologically and intellectually superior to anything humanity had ever encountered. But Kellen was cautious. He knew that first contact could go wrong in so many ways. The hum of the base's machinery was a constant in the background, but Kellen's mind was elsewhere. He was alone in his office, with only the cold, distant stars as his company. He could still feel the weight of the meeting earlier in the day, the first official interaction with Arin, a representative of the Velar. She had walked into the room with an air of quiet confidence, her silver-blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights. Her eyes, dark and intense, had seemed to peer straight through Kellen as though she could see every thought that crossed his mind. The Velar's appearance was both alien and beautiful, with their elongated limbs and graceful, almost ethereal movements. They were taller than humans, their skin covered in smooth, metallic hues, and their eyes were deep pools of color that seemed to glow with an inner light. Their speech was melodic, flowing, and calming, but Kellen had noticed something more. There was a weight to her presence, an unspoken power that seemed to fill the room when she spoke. The moment she had entered the room, Kellen had felt his heart race, a reaction he couldn't explain. She had asked him questions, simple ones, but the way she asked them left him feeling exposed, as if she could see through him. He had told himself it was just the nerves, the excitement of the situation, but deep down he knew it was. There was something more between them, something unspoken, and it made him uneasy. The memory of her words echoed in his mind, clear and direct. "Do you want me now or later?" The way she had whispered it so softly, yet with an undeniable intensity, had sent a shiver down his spine. Kellen tried to shake off the feeling. It wasn't possible, he told himself. She was an alien and he was a human. There was no way there could be anything between them. Yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt, a magnetic force that seemed to draw him toward her, even now, miles away. He took a deep breath and turned away from the window, trying to focus on the task at hand. The Velar were a mystery, and he had come to Xylar 5 to uncover that mystery. But now, after meeting Arin, the question was no longer just about discovery. It was about something else, something personal. Kellen knew he had to be careful. He had spent his career as a scientist, and he was trained to stay detached, objective. But Arin had changed all of that in a matter of minutes. Her presence, her eyes, her voice. It was as if she had peeled back a layer of his soul and exposed something deep within him that he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The next few days passed in a blur of scientific data, experiments, and reports. Kellen found himself working with the Velar more frequently, and each time he did, his feelings grew more complicated. Arin was always there, always watching, always asking questions, probing into his thoughts. She seemed to know exactly what to say, when to say it, and Kellen found himself responding to her in ways that confused him. He wasn't a man easily swayed by emotions. He had always prided himself on his logic, his ability to think clearly, but with Arin, logic seemed to slip away. One afternoon, while Kellen was reviewing data in his lab, Arin approached him. He didn't hear her footsteps. Her movements were so quiet, so fluid, that she seemed to appear out of thin air. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, her presence filling the room. She was dressed in the same silver-blue attire she had worn during their first meeting, but today, there was something different about her. Her expression was softer, almost inquisitive, as if she were studying him, trying to understand him in ways that went beyond the scientific. "Kellen," she said softly, her voice a soothing melody that seemed to reach into his chest. "Are you enjoying your time on Xylar 5? The question was simple, but it sent a jolt through him. He nodded quickly, trying to mask the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "Yes, it's incredible," he said, though his voice felt tight, unsure. "We're learning a lot." Aaron stepped into the room, her eyes never leaving his. "And what have you learned about us?" she asked, her gaze steady and searching. Kellen swallowed hard. "I've learned that your species is far beyond anything we could have imagined. Your technology, your knowledge, it's beyond us." Aaron tilted her head slightly as though considering his words. Then she took a step closer, her gaze intensifying. "And what about me, Kellen?" Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "What have you learned about me?" Kellen froze, his heart pounding in his chest. There it was again, the pull, the magnetic force that seemed to surround her, drawing him in despite his best efforts to resist. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Aaron was too close, her presence too overwhelming. Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Kellen saw something else in her gaze, a vulnerability, a hint of emotion that hadn't been there before. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I barely know you." Aaron smiled, but there was something almost sad in the curve of her lips. "That's true, you don't know me," she said softly. "But you want to, don't you?" Kellen's breath caught in his throat. The words she spoke weren't just questions, they were a challenge, an invitation to something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But the way she looked at him, the way she spoke, made it feel like there was no other choice. His mind raced, his rational thoughts battling with the emotions that were bubbling to the surface. He had never felt this way before, not with anyone, let alone an alien. Her gaze never wavered, and Kellen felt his resolve crumbling. There was something undeniable about her, something magnetic and powerful. He wanted to step forward to close the distance between them, but something held him back. He didn't know if it was fear, uncertainty, or the deep-rooted sense of duty that had driven him to this point in his career. But whatever it was, it kept him from making the leap. Aaron seemed to sense his hesitation. She took a step back, her expression unreadable. "You are conflicted, Kellen," she said, her voice calm. "But you will decide eventually. Whether now or later you will choose." Kellen watched as she turned and walked out of the room, her movements graceful and effortless. As she left, the door slid shut behind her, and the silence in the room felt almost oppressive. Kellen stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where she had been. Her words echoed in his mind. "Do you want me now or later?" He wasn't sure what he wanted, or even what he was supposed to want. But he knew one thing for certain. Aaron had awakened something inside him that he couldn't ignore, no matter how hard he tried. The days following that encounter with Aaron passed in a blur of work, isolation, and unanswered questions. Kellen found himself becoming more and more distracted, his thoughts wandering back to her every time his mind was free. Aaron's presence, her words, and that soft whisper of hers continued to haunt him, pulling him in with an intensity he had never felt before. It was as if something deep inside him was awakening, something he had never acknowledged in his life. He tried to focus on the tasks at hand. The Velar were an extraordinary species, technologically advanced, intellectually superior, and utterly alien. Kellen's team had been tasked with understanding their technology, their language, and the very essence of their civilization. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and he couldn't afford to get distracted by feelings that made no sense. But no matter how hard he tried to push thoughts of Aaron aside, they kept creeping back into his mind, taking hold of him in ways that felt both thrilling and terrifying. It wasn't just the physical pull he felt toward her, though that was undeniable. Aaron was unlike anyone Kellen had ever met, beautiful, enigmatic, and powerful in a way that was almost otherworldly. But there was something more. Every time he looked into her eyes, He felt as if she were looking right through him, as if she could see parts of him that no one else could. It unsettled him, but at the same time, it intrigued him. The way she made him feel was something he couldn't explain, but it was powerful enough to keep him coming back for more. And so, despite the storm of confusion inside him, Kellen found himself seeking out more interactions with Aaron. He would often visit the main hall, where the Veller had set up their temporary living quarters, and find a reason to speak with her. Sometimes it was about science, about their technology, about the future of their species. Other times it was just a casual conversation, where they would talk about their differences and similarities. But with each meeting, the connection between them grew stronger, more intense. One evening, after another long day of research, Kellen found himself walking down the dimly lit corridor toward the Veller quarters. His heart raced as he approached, and he wondered what it was that he was searching for. Was it knowledge? Or was it something more, something he couldn't quite put into words? He couldn't deny that every time he saw her, his pulse quickened, and his thoughts became clouded. As he rounded the corner, he saw her standing there, waiting for him. Aaron was as striking as ever, her silver-blue skin glowing softly in the low light. Her eyes locked onto his the moment he came into view, and for a moment, Kellen felt as though the rest of the world had faded away. There was no one else in the hallway, just the two of them standing there in silence. "Dr. Hart," Aaron said, her voice as smooth and melodic as it always was. "I was hoping we could talk." Kellen nodded, his throat dry. "Of course," he said, his voice betraying the nervousness he felt. "What did you want to discuss?" Aaron stepped closer, her presence overwhelming yet calming at the same time. "I've been observing you, Kellen," she said softly, her gaze never leaving his. "And I think you're starting to understand." Kellen frowned, unsure of what she meant. "Understand what?" "Understand what it means to be human," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Your species is fascinating. You are capable of so much more than you realize. But there is a struggle inside you, a battle between who you are and who you could be." Kellen felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't know what you mean." Aaron smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "You will in time, but for now I want to show you something." Before Kellen could respond, Aaron took a step forward and gently placed her hand on his arm. The touch was light, almost ethereal, but it sent a shock of energy through Kellen's body, as if her touch was more than just physical. It was something deeper, something connected to his very being. "Close your eyes," she said, her voice a soft command. "Let go of everything, trust me." Kellen hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he was about to experience. But the pull of her presence was too strong, and he found himself closing his eyes, allowing the darkness to consume him. At first, there was nothing but silence. But then, gradually, he began to feel something, something not unlike a presence but far more intense. It was as if he was no longer standing in the corridor, but instead floating in a vast, empty space, surrounded by light and energy. He could hear a faint hum, like the pulse of the universe itself, vibrating through him. His body felt weightless, as though he was no longer bound by the laws of physics. And then he saw it. Visions, flashes of images, colors, and shapes that made no sense, yet somehow felt familiar. He saw stars being born, planets colliding, galaxies swirling in a cosmic dance. He saw a human civilization, one that was far beyond anything he could ever imagine. He saw himself, his future, his potential, and it was as though everything he had ever known was laid bare before him. The visions intensified, becoming more vivid, more real. He saw himself standing alongside Aaron, both of them gazing out at the universe together, as if they were equals, as if they were part of something greater than themselves. The feeling of connection was overwhelming, and Kellen felt as though he was seeing the truth of his existence, the truth of the universe itself. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision faded. Kellen opened his eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He found himself back in the hallway, standing in front of Aaron, who was watching him with a calm, knowing expression. "What was that?" Kellen asked, his voice trembling. "What did you show me?" Aaron's smile remained soft, almost sad. "I showed you what you are capable of, Kellen. I showed you what it means to see beyond your limitations. Your species has so much potential, but you must first free yourselves from the chains that bind you." Kellen shook his head, trying to process what he had just experienced. "But I don't understand. Why me? Why show me this?" Aaron's eyes softened. "Because you are ready, Kellen. You are ready to embrace what comes next. Humanity has the power to evolve, to transcend your limitations. But it will require a choice that only you can make." Kellen felt his heart racing, his mind spinning with the weight of what she had just revealed. He didn't know what he was supposed to do with this information, or even what it meant. But he knew one thing for sure: Aaron was offering him something he couldn't refuse. She was offering him the chance to transcend, to evolve beyond anything he had ever imagined. "Are you ready to embrace the unknown?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Kellen's pulse quickened, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and confusion. He didn't know the answer, but he knew that he was standing at a crossroads, and whatever path he chose would change everything. The choice was his. And in that moment, Kellen realized that he wasn't just deciding his future. He was deciding humanity's future. Kellen couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The moment he had closed his eyes in that corridor, he had stepped into a new reality, one where the lines between science and the unknown blurred together in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. The visions Aaron had shown him felt like more than just images. They were a message, an invitation to see beyond the surface, to understand what humanity could be if it embraced its true potential. The next few days were filled with confusion and uncertainty. Kellen found himself questioning everything. He would wake up, go through the motions of his research, and try to focus on the data, but his mind kept wandering back to Aaron. Her words echoed in his head, and he found himself replaying the visions over and over. What had she meant by the chains that bound him? What was it that humanity was meant to transcend? It wasn't just the science that called to him now, it was something deeper, something personal. Every time he saw Aaron, he felt an undeniable pull toward her, a magnetic force that he couldn't explain. She was so different, so alien, and yet there was something in her that spoke to a part of him he didn't even know existed. The more he saw her, the more he wanted to understand what she was offering, what this strange connection between them meant. Kellen tried to keep his distance, to focus on his work, but it was impossible. Aaron was everywhere, her presence a constant weight in the air. It wasn't just the way she looked at him, though that alone was enough to make his heart race. It was the way she seemed to understand him, as if she could see through all the layers of his mind and soul, as though she knew things about him that even he didn't know. Every conversation with her felt like a challenge, a test of some kind, and Kellen found himself both drawn to it and afraid of it at the same time. One evening, after a long day of analyzing data from the Velar technology, Kellen found himself standing outside the facility, looking up at the stars. The night sky was clear, and the distant lights of the distant planets twinkled like tiny diamonds. It was peaceful out here, and for a moment Kellen felt a sense of calm wash over him. The stars seemed so far away, so unreachable, and yet they represented something more, something vast and unknown. He had always been a scientist, someone who sought to understand, to uncover the mysteries of the universe. But now, with Aaron's influence lingering in his mind, he wasn't sure if he was looking for answers or just more questions. He wasn't alone for long. The soft sound of footsteps approached him from behind, and Kellen knew immediately who it was. He didn't turn around, not at first. Instead, he continued to gaze at the stars, his thoughts swirling. "You've been distant," Aaron's voice came from behind him, her tone soft and almost comforting. "I can sense it." Kellen finally turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've been busy," he said, his voice flat. He didn't know why he was lying. The truth was that he had been trying to avoid her, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But somehow, every time he saw her, every time she spoke, he felt as though he was being pulled back into the storm of confusion that had started when they first met. Aaron stepped closer, her presence undeniable. "Is that all?" she asked, her voice low and almost teasing. "You've been avoiding me, Kellen. You're afraid of what you feel." Kellen felt a flash of irritation. "I'm not afraid," he said quickly. "I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. I've never felt like this before, and I don't know if I can trust it." Aaron's eyes softened, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't need to trust it," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "You just need to accept it. You are at the edge of something, Kellen, something far greater than yourself, and it's not something you can control no matter how hard you try." Kellen swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know what you mean. I don't know what any of this means." Aaron's expression softened, and for a moment Kellen thought he saw a flicker of something like sympathy or perhaps even understanding. "I know this is hard for you," she said quietly, "but you're not alone. I'm here to help you understand." Kellen shook his head, trying to push the confusion aside. "I don't need help. I need answers. I need to understand what this is, what's happening to me." Aaron took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What's happening to you, Kellen, is that you're awakening. You're starting to see the universe as it truly is, beyond the limits of your human perception. Your mind is expanding and it's making you uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the first step." Kellen's heart raced, and he felt his chest tighten. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice strained. "What is this awakening? What does it mean for me, for humanity?" Aaron's gaze softened, her expression almost unreadable. "It means that you have the potential to be more than you ever imagined. You're not just a man. You're a part of something greater, and when you embrace it, when you accept the change, you will see the truth of everything. The universe will open up to you, and you will finally understand." Kellen was silent for a long time, trying to make sense of her words. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to understand what she was offering, but something held him back. He had always prided himself on his logic, his ability to think clearly and rationally. But with Aaron, all of that seemed to fall away. She was offering him something that didn't fit into his neatly ordered world, something that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "What happens if I can't accept it?" Kellen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aaron's gaze remained steady, her eyes never leaving his. "You will never know what you could become. You will stay where you are, bound by the limitations of your own mind, never able to break free of the chains that hold you." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, and Kellen felt a chill run through him. He didn't want to stay where he was. He didn't want to be limited by his own fears and doubts. But at the same time, he wasn't sure if he was ready to step into the unknown, to embrace whatever it was that Aaron was offering. "You don't have to decide now," Aaron said softly, sensing his hesitation, "but you will have to decide eventually." Kellen stood there in silence, staring at her, unsure of what to do next. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the knowledge that whatever choice he made would change everything, not just for him, but for all of humanity. The future was uncertain, and yet it was standing before him in the form of Aaron and the offer she had made. The stars above shimmered, silent witnesses to the crossroads Kellen stood at. He had always thought that the key to understanding the universe lay in the answers. But now he wasn't so sure. Perhaps the key lay in the questions themselves, in the willingness to embrace the unknown and step into a future that was as uncertain as the stars above. As the night stretched on, Kellen realized that he wasn't just standing on the edge of something greater. He was standing at the edge of himself, ready to make a decision that would define not just his own life, but the future of humanity. And no matter what choice he made, He knew that it would take him to places he had never imagined. The days that followed Kellen's meeting with Aaron were filled with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The decision that lay before him was not one he could take lightly. The visions, the strange connection, and the powerful pull he felt toward her, all of it seemed to lead him toward something that was both terrifying and exciting. It was as though the universe itself was asking him to make a choice that could shape not just his own future, but the future of all of humanity. Kellen tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to Aaron and the offer she had made. It wasn't just a choice about himself. It was a choice about the potential of humanity, the chance to evolve beyond its limitations. The question, however, was whether he was ready to embrace that change, whether he was ready to take the leap into the unknown. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't just facing a decision about science or technology. He was facing a decision about his own identity, about what it meant to be human. He spent hours in his lab, surrounded by data and research, trying to ground himself in the familiar. The Velar technology was astonishing, and there were still so many questions to answer. But every time he looked at the data, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a distraction. The true question was not about what the Velar could teach humanity. It was about what humanity could learn about itself. And that was a question that went far beyond science. Kellen's thoughts often drifted back to Aaron. He couldn't get her out of his mind. There was something about her presence, something about the way she spoke to him, that made him feel both small and powerful at the same time. She had offered him a glimpse of something greater, a vision of what humanity could become if it shed its fears and embraced the unknown. But it wasn't just the vision that lingered. It was the feeling she had evoked in him, the deep, almost primal connection that he couldn't explain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon of Xylar 5, Kellen found himself once again standing outside, staring up at the vast expanse of stars. The night sky was clear, and the stars seemed to stretch on forever, each one a distant reminder of the unknown. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him, but there was also something else, something that felt like a shift in the air, a change in the atmosphere. It was as if the universe itself was waiting for him to make his choice. He wasn't alone for long. The sound of footsteps approached, soft and steady, and Kellen didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Aaron's presence filled the air around him, and he felt the familiar pull of her energy, like a magnet drawing him closer. "You're still thinking about it," she said, her voice calm and steady. Kellen didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at the stars. There was so much he didn't understand, so much he didn't know, but he knew that he couldn't keep avoiding the decision. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice filled with frustration. "I don't know if I can do this. What you're offering, it's too much." Aaron stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars as well. "I never said it would be easy, Kellen," she said softly. "But you already know what you need to do. The choice is not about what I want, it's about what you want, and more importantly, what humanity wants." Kellen turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean by that? How is this about humanity? This is about me. It's about what I can do, what I can become." Aaron's eyes met his, and there was a depth to her gaze that made Kellen feel as though she could see right through him. "It's not just about you, Kellen. It's about what you represent. Humanity has always been limited by its own fears, by its own self-imposed boundaries. But you have the potential to break those boundaries. You are the key, Kellen. You and all of humanity have the power to evolve, to transcend. But it begins with you." Kellen felt a knot form in his stomach. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air between them. He had always known that humanity was capable of great things: science, exploration, innovation. But now, Aaron was telling him that there was something even greater waiting for them. The potential for humanity to evolve, to become something more than human, was within reach. But it wasn't just about technology or knowledge. It was about changing the very essence of what it meant to be human. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Kellen said quietly. "I don't know if I can be the one to make that choice. I'm just a scientist. I'm not a leader." Arin's expression softened, and for a brief moment Kellen saw something in her eyes, something vulnerable, something almost human. "You don't have to be a leader, Kellen," she said gently. "You just have to be willing to take the first step. The rest will follow." Kellen looked at her, his heart racing. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but there was also a sense of clarity. He knew that he couldn't stay in the safety of his old life, in the world of logic and reason. The universe was offering him something beyond that, something that would change everything. But it would require him to let go of his doubts, to embrace the unknown, and to trust that humanity could rise to the challenge. "I don't know what will happen if I choose this," Kellen said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I can't ignore it anymore. I can't keep running away from this." Arin nodded, her expression steady. "You've made the first step, Kellen. The rest will come in time." Kellen took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling in his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't go back. He had already seen too much, felt too much. The universe was calling to him, and he couldn't ignore it. It was time to step into the unknown. Arin took a step closer to him, her presence filling the air around him. "There's no turning back now," she said softly. "But that's the beauty of it. You're not meant to go back, you're meant to move forward." Kellen looked into her eyes, his heart racing. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he was standing on the edge of something incredible, something that would change everything. He was no longer just a scientist. He was part of something greater, something that went beyond the limits of human understanding. "I'm ready," Kellen said, his voice steady. Arin smiled, a smile that was both knowing and reassuring. "Good. The future of humanity begins now, Kellen." The two of them stood there in silence, gazing out at the stars, knowing that they were about to take the first step into a future that no one could predict. Kellen's heart was full of uncertainty, but there was also a sense of excitement, of possibility. The choice had been made, and now there was no turning back. As the night stretched on, Kellen realized that the universe was no longer something distant and unreachable. It was something he was a part of, something he could shape, something humanity could shape. And in that moment, he understood that the unknown wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, something to be explored. The future was waiting, and it was up to him, and to all of humanity, to step into it.